Okay, welcome back to Live with MJSA Expo. This is our second day of MJSA Expo at the Javits in New York City. If you are in the area and haven't visited the show yet, we encourage you to get here and check out all of the tools and supplies and partnerships and partners that you could be working with in your jewelry making business. MJSA is the only association that is specifically for the makers of jewelry, and this is your show. For our first session today, we are talking about business models and how business model changes are affecting the jewelry industry. And to have this conversation, I have three very lively guests. I expect this session to be a lot of fun. So on my far left, we have Matthijs Braakman. He is the president of SmartWork Media. SmartWork Media is the publisher of In-Store Magazine, as well as 7 other magazines for different verticals. Did I get that right? Is it still 7 other?
Yeah, it's more or less that. We also have some conventions in the independent garden center industry, we're in cannabis, those kind of places.
So diversified publishing and events company. Then we have Ann Arnold. Ann is the Chief Strategic Officer of BIG. And we have Roger Gesswein III, who's Vice President of Gesswein. And to kick this conversation off, I just want to ask you guys, what do you see as the stresses to the jewelry industry that are indicative of model changes that are coming, that we're either already starting to see or will be seeing soon?
I can start. Labor has been a big stress, from manufacturing to retail, finding skilled labor and matching them to the right positions. That, from talking to retailers and manufacturers in the industry, labor shortages have been the biggest pain point for jewelry. Absolutely.
I agree with that. I'm seeing labor being a big problem that a lot of retailers and manufacturers talk about. And then overall, the consumer shift and the way the consumer is buying and their buying habits. I mean, with everything turning to hybrid workforces and the expectations both from the labor force, whether it's on the bench or even just help in the stores, to the way the consumer's coming in, and how I don't necessarily think everybody, some in the jewelry industry were prepared for that shift, but I've seen a lot of people scrambling and trying to not only have just a website, but having an e-commerce website. And not only having an e-commerce website, but an e-commerce website that's up to date with what's currently in inventory. It's not enough just to sell jewelry. If you don't have it, then you're gonna get the consumer to be angry because they're buying something you don't have. So there's a lot of thought process that goes into it. And I'm finding that more and more retailers especially are realizing they've gotta step up to the plate.
Good. For me, it's also, besides labor and all those things, it's also inflationary pressure in general, right? Cost of goods, cost of labor, increase in interest rates, right? Capital is more expensive today, so especially if you're a larger enterprise, you're more leveraged, you're relying on capital markets. So borrowing money is becoming more difficult, expansion becomes more difficult, marketing, everything else that finances those businesses. So it's definitely a big change that they have to adapt to. In light of that, I think there's a little bit more strength to the independents who are not as leveraged, who don't have as much debt, who don't rely on revolving credit and those kind of things to continue to force their position in the market, provide unique customer experiences. So I think, from my perspective, I see a bright future for independent brick and mortar stores, and hopefully that continues.
I think that also, one thing that the independent retailer and I'll say small business manufacturer, but the truth is 98% of our industry qualifies as small business. Smaller businesses are not as used to having to deal with risk as larger businesses because they're not as leveraged, because they don't take the same kinds of big swings. But this changing relationship to risk that's affecting everyone is also part of changing models and thinking about how we finance growth and how we embrace the risk that's necessary in the current environment.
It's important to take risk to be able to capitalize on the opportunities in the industry. So relying on your foreign supply chain where you can import products from China and overseas that model didn't work the past few years, and I don't think it will work in the future. So investing in local manufacturing, even on a small scale for a retailer, I think is probably the way forward to take advantage of custom design, custom manufacturing, reducing your inventory. If you can manufacture on a small scale, then you can reduce your inventory. And you can provide your customer with a good product in a matter of days, as opposed to importing from overseas and having to wait weeks for a product that may be not as high of a quality, I'd say.
And I'm just going to build on that for a second. I think the definition of risk, they think in terms, like you said, like the big things, like, oh, well, I don't have a line from the bank, so I don't have any risk. But risk goes beyond just that. It goes to your point. Increased inventory. Everyone looks at that as, well, that's money in the bank, right? It's money. Well, that's not an asset. Maybe according to the accountants and GAAP financial statements, it's an asset, but it's not, because once it's aged, it becomes a risk. It becomes a liability. It becomes your money tied up. And I think that the shift in the thought process there has to occur, and it is slowly occurring. And people during COVID, all of a sudden, inventory levels went down, people realized that, wow, I've got to work through it. But now we're seeing it creep back up. People are forgetting the lessons that they learned. And you had made a comment about customer experiences. That's the other thing. We forget that customer experiences, we hear that tag word all the time. What does that mean? How have you embraced that, both as a retailer or as a manufacturer? Are you giving the customer the experience when they come to the trade show? Are you giving the customer the experience when they're coming into your store? And so thinking through that process, I think, is important as well.
No, to build off all that, I mean, the risk is not adapting to change and the things that are coming to you. So, I think one of the interesting things that we always talk about is the maturity of your business. And I think in the fine jewelry business and independent retailers, very often, there's still a perspective of inventory being an asset. And I can sympathize or empathize to that. If you're, let's say if you're looking at 5 to 10 years before your retirement horizon, and there's still some perspective, like I've built up some inventory, it's going to finance some of my retirement, I can live off that, sell some stones after the fact. Some people close up their businesses and do person-to-person sales and those kind of things. I think if you're a younger business, then your assets become a risk, and you've got to figure out a way to turn quicker, because your horizon to build wealth and equity is going to be 20, 30 years. So your perspective changes a little bit. But at the same time, I think to everybody's point, the risk is standing around thinking the same thing is going to happen over and over again. Your local market's changing, everything is changing around you. We've all experienced black swan events, and they can occur. But in the general course of business, I think what happens is you see these new things coming, figure out how to implement them into your business, and then have them modify so you can adjust to that risk from a business development perspective.
Well, and I think that's the reason we're talking about business models today is because people focus on good times and stressful times like recessions and black swan events, but they forget that the real game changer for every industry and vertical is model change. That's really what will push sweeping change through an industry, and sometimes it's change that you don't even notice until you look back and realize, wow, everything changed in the last 5 years and it snuck up on us. And we should be putting model change right up there with black swan events and, the things we're used to focusing on. You took us to a landing point just a moment ago. You talked about, and by a landing point, I mean, where do these model changes take us? Like what's going to happen in the future? And one of them is more localized manufacturing. And maybe not giant manufacturing plants like we had, up until the 70s and 80s domestically, but, smaller, more localized manufacturing possibly. What are some of these other landing points that could be coming because of labor stresses, supply chain challenges? So I want to talk about the stresses and then talk about also where you guys see them going.
The manufacturing locally can maybe, in my opinion, help solve the labor issue as well. Because if you have more technology, you need more operators. And also retaining employees, the way to do it is to have the most innovative, cool technology so they feel comfortable that your business is on the forefront and going into the future. So, yeah, please.
That's a really critical model change to talk about. Nobody wants to work for a company that is behind the times. You want to get a young person out of college that wants a career, you cannot introduce them to an OG company that they're afraid isn't going to be around 6 years from now.
And I was going to say, the thing is, we have our own fears. Because if we don't understand it, we don't understand how we can bring it into our business model, rather than realizing we do have to rely sometimes on those that appear to have less experience than us or maybe younger than us, but they understand who that new consumer is. We were talking earlier, the 12-year-old today that's comfortable with certain technologies is the consumer in 10 years. How are you setting your business up to be able to attract and keep that as your consumer? And if we don't embrace and bring in that technology or try to understand it, and if we don't understand it, surround ourselves with people that do understand it, we're going to fall behind.
I guess we're doing the circuit here.
You don't have to. You can talk in any order you like.
No, to that point, I think that, you know, I think sometimes it's difficult to, you know, to incorporate all of these new technologies and these things into your business. You know, we've been talking for 20 years about e-commerce taking over all of retail, and today it accounts for about 13% of retail. So at the same time as we get all these things that are changing the undertone of our markets and our industries, but at the same, we also have the luxury to think about it, look at it, see how it can implement and apply to our businesses before we think that the rug is going to get pulled out from under us. I mean, we're constantly having these big social conversations right now. ChatGPT is one of those. It's going to replace everybody here in this room, right? But at the same time, it's another tool. The question is, what is it going to be, and how do we incorporate that into our businesses?
Well, you were going to say another tool, so you just said e-commerce, right? And it's all, everyone thought it was going to take over, and it's only X percentage. But I'm going to just push back a little bit. If you don't have an e-commerce site, people don't view you as a viable resource for them to shop in. They may not be shopping online, but I can almost guarantee you they're going online first to see who you are, what you look like, get your personality, what's in the store before they're walking in.
That's what I was going to point to also. When model change is happening, we don't always know exactly how it's going to play out. But very much, you know, will people be shopping physical retail? Yes, forever. Physical retail is not going away. But not only do they want the e-commerce environment to see what you're like, if your technology and your business does, and this is B2B as well, by the way, B2B business looks a lot more like B2C business than it ever did before in terms of considering who you'll buy from. If your technology doesn't allow you to have your inventory completely synced to your website at all times, the buyer cannot do the pre-shopping that they expect to be able to do. So you lose trade show traffic if you're a supplier, or foot traffic if you're a retailer.
And talking about that, not only the inventory and online, people, again, the younger consumer, the generation that's coming in is very, very invested in sustainability, in diversity and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And if you're not understanding how that impacts you, both from your own staff and who you employ and how you conduct your business, to who you're buying from and how the industry at large is looking at it, you're going to fall behind. You need to understand what that means. And if you don't know what that means, go to Google right now and look it up, because I think it's really important that we all understand. Again, it may not be today, it may not be everybody today, but the words, those trigger words are happening out there, and we need to know how that's going to impact us.
Another one is transparency. Transparency is a big thing for consumers, and transparency of your supply chain. It's complicated. We have 17,000 different products, but understanding where they come from, being able to communicate that, and to let the consumer know this is sourced in a certain way will give them confidence in your business for the future.
And that's a huge model change for the jewelry industry, because we have such a history of opacity when it comes to supply and protecting our suppliers. And it just doesn't play anymore. We are the last industry to have to deal with the fact that our supply chains need to be transparent. And until we make that mind shift, we won't make those systems shifts that allow us to have visibility through the supply chain.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I guess there's an inherent resistance to that transparency, because the more transparent it is, the more of a squeeze on your margins you get, and we see that in the business, right, is commoditized, the diamond margins get squeezed. And so there's some idea here that we want to create mystery around the products we sell, so that we can create margin. The reason we create brands is so we can create margin on these products. So in that sense, it's, you know, transparency is, I agree with you as a consumer, from a business perspective, you also want to create this mystery around the product so that you can create that opaqueness, so that you can capture more margin, so you can build more product, you can keep the enterprise going.
But I'm not sure that transparency necessarily means that we have to say, I'm buying from X, Y, and Z. Transparency, and that's what people think it means, but it just means that you have policies in place, that you publicly say that I check all my suppliers and I make sure that we are responsibly sourcing, that we are going from blah, 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 blah. You know, in other words, I don't think transparency, and again, this is what most people think, it means, well, I have to tell you who I'm buying from. No, you just have to tell us what your policies are. What exactly what's your thought process when you're going out there and sourcing and bringing things in? And I think that is also the other thing, is the definitions that we normally look at maybe aren't exactly the reality.
Well, and if you have, and there's two pieces to that. Boy, there's like 5 pieces to that. One thing is the fashion industry navigated that, and we thought back in the 80s when I was in the fashion industry, transparency was going to kill us, and it did not. We found ways to navigate that. The other thing is, if you're, I think sometimes you do have to say who you're buying from if you are not using like some form of an external audit. If you're externally audited in your claims, then you don't have to disclose, you just have to disclose that you're audited. But if you're doing non-audited purchasing, then there is more disclosure involved in order to achieve that transparency.
But there's ways around it.
But there are ways to do it, yep.
Transparency is a differentiator in this industry. Who's doing it on a whole scale? Where's my gold coming from? How's it mined? Where are my gemstones coming from? I think the leaders who take advantage of that will have success. And there are some.
Yeah, we see that in the designer community and the Chicago Responsible Jewelers Council. So there's definitely entities here in this industry that are trying to build that transparency to help sourcing and all of those kind of things. It's an exciting development because obviously it relates to the customers out there who are looking for that information.
Well, and it's messy and incremental in our gains, and there are no real, simple, obvious answers, but there are answers being built as the jewelry industry comes together to discuss these things and figure out new models for supply and new models for transparency. And we're only going to figure it out if we all work on it together, but not working on it together is going to be an industry failure.
And I've noticed some of the branded and larger manufacturers are actually hiring people for this specific job. Their role is not only to figure out how to make us more transparent, but how to get that message out there to both the industry at large and the consumer. Because if that's where the consumer is expecting, if that's what their consumer is expecting, let them buy from my brand. Let them walk into a retail store asking for my brand because I'm already doing it.
Yeah, there isn't a major luxury brand, LVMH brands, Tiffany, they all have responsibility officers in place.
Yeah, it's an expense, right? So it's hard for a small independent store to do that. But in that sense, you could maybe rely a bit on your sourcing. Those people can help you with achieving that kind of responsible.
And if you source locally, in a way, you can source your sapphires from Montana instead. And there are ways to do it on a small scale, I think, that's still powerful and impactful and will give your consumers more confidence.
And I mean, it speaks a little bit to, the changes that are happening at retail, on brick and mortar at least, is that your consumer appetites are changing. And so what the real responsibility for as an operator in the local community is to figure out how your customers are evolving, right? They're no longer, 10 years from now, they're going to be different people walking through your door. They have different ideas of what they need, different trends they want to follow, different brands that inspire them. And so the real finesse is, one of the specialties of any good retailer is merchandising. What's the product in your cases that speak to this consumer? And in addition to that, what's the experience they have when they walk into the store? Is it speaking to them on a demographic basis? Is it talking about diversity? Is it talking about, in our visual merchandising brands, we talk about biophilic design, right? How do you bring in nature-inspired elements into your store to create feelings of comfort and space and those kind of things. So there's some really innovative ways on redesigning the stores to meet your customers' demands, especially as they move forward. But adjusting for that is the continual effort of running these businesses.
I have a question for you. A small independent retailer, where do they learn about this?
Shop Marketplace.
For example.
The in-store show?
No, well, there's some of that in-store show. You know, we also run the Shop Association, which is for store fixturing and point-of-purchase display. We're developing a trade show for them that is in April in Austin. So there'll be some of those conversations there. We publish a magazine called VMSD, Visual Merchandising Store Design, which talks about these in depth. But there's a lot of stuff you can find on the internet in general as well as going to any of these trade shows, right? People are here walking around having these conversations. So I think that's...
But it's such a good question that Roger asked, because one of the things I realize is in the jewelry industry at the retail level, people aren't as familiar with all of the different things that you do to create store experience. This is a very dynamic practice if you're in consumer, other consumer goods retail. But in the jewelry industry, we just haven't looked outside of our, usual retail walls and cases. And that store experience that we're talking about is really where a lot of focus needs to happen.
Yeah, and another thing is getting outside, right? Going to New York and going to a great shopping street or Chicago or wherever it is and figuring out what some of these retailers are doing, walking into these establishments and seeing how they're speaking to their audience that come in. I mean, that's what you do when you're trend shopping for a brand or anything. So think about building the business that way.
But thinking about how the model has shifted, how do you speak to that person? More and more, especially the younger generation, are relying on influencers. And how is it, if you can't, not everyone's going to be able to hook up with an influencer, but how do you become the influencer? Especially in your marketplace. How do you become the person that they're going to come to when they're looking for advice or to know what the trend is or whatever? So it's about that shift as well. I mean, that's been a very subtle shift, but it's huge. You connect with one influencer that talks about your store, that they shopped in your store, that they bought your brand. All of a sudden, all these 20-year-olds are like looking for you and are flooding your Instagram account or your TikTok or whatever it may be. These are huge influencer, not influencer, the influencer market is a very real shift in the way the consumers get their information. I mean, I remember people were telling me, oh yeah, did you hear this happened? I said, where'd you hear this? On TikTok. That's where they're getting their news. So we have to be in that arena in order to speak to that consumer that's coming up.
Well, and Roger alluded to something a moment ago, because I know a lot of the listeners in our audience are producers and manufacturers. And you were talking about working with retail. You asked a question for retailers of Matthijs. This transparency that we're talking about is also approaching our supply chain differently. One of the model changes that has to happen is much greater collaboration between the manufacturers and suppliers and their retailers. It's no longer okay just to know what that retail store buys. We really need to understand all the way through to the marketplace they're operating in. And the suppliers and manufacturers that develop those really powerful partnerships with their retail brands, they're the ones that are going to succeed as well.
There's a book, it's called The Challenger Sale. And we talk about it all the time. It's about the days of walking in to your store, to the retailers with your case and opening it up and saying, hey, look at this pretty new stuff. It doesn't exist anymore. You need to walk in and you need to find out who they are. Walk the store. Figure out who their consumer is. Develop programs, develop merchandise, and speak to that consumer. Where are they buying your product? Rather than trying to walk in and do everything, you need to learn what their pain points are. What is it that they need? What is their consumer looking for? How can we help with that? And it's a shift. It's a total shift because our industry has been so reliant on the traveling salesperson walking in with their suitcase. And it's not the same anymore.
And we need to be curating differently with every retail outlet because of their different market.
Even the same store that has 9 different locations can't have one program that goes into 9 different locations anymore. It just doesn't work.
and to that, that's the value you add, is to be able to customize on such a unique level. That's from a manufacturing perspective is incredibly valuable, right? That I can pinpoint all of these different, because you're not selling to 100,000 consumers. You can focus on those 100 best accounts that you have and provide them a very unique individualized service, which is absolutely the magic of the business.
And I got to go here. It's data. Because our industry has for so long relied on gut. And gut is great. Don't get rid of your gut. Listen to your gut. But back it up with the data. And we are if you look at industries overall, they've been using data for years. We're one of the last ones to realize that that's powerful. And it's underused.
It's underused, it's readily available, it's affordable for small businesses now, but it means that small businesses need to implement the technologies not only for streamlining their operations, not only for automating more of their business processes, not only for managing their sales pipelines differently, but also if all that data if that technology is being used to run your business, that's where you get the data for the analysis that you need. Because it's not, going to your Facebook Insights only tells you what's happening on Facebook. You need the whole collection of your data from internal and external systems to give you a picture of the world that you're marketing and selling into.
And rather than looking at it as an expense, it's an investment. And that's a very key thing in your mind. You were saying, everything is an expense, it's an expense. This is actually an investment because you will be able to see the ROI if you get somebody on your team. Yes, you're going to have to train them. They may not come from the jewelry industry. But if they can understand how to comb through the data to make better business decisions from a buying perspective, a merchandising perspective, all the way through. Marketing, it hits every part and every person around the table.
Yep. I think the phrase that is going around a little bit is the return on hassle, right? So I think one of the things that's difficult is that from a smaller or an independent business or a manufacturer, you've got so many parts of your data stack, right, that don't lead into one dashboard. And you have to correlate why this relates to that, or why your Instagram account relates to your inventory management system. And there's very little support to help an independent business owner to navigate that. Maybe you'll disagree. But at the same time, if your day-to-day is opening and closing that store and managing the team and all those things, you don't have much time left to do all the other stuff. And so it gets really, really challenging on a personal level to get all of that under control.
It seems like we're giving a lot of homework to retailers, but there's so many resources out there, and you can partner with great companies who can help you in your manufacturing, in your merchandising, in your data collection, data analyzing, all of that. So it's not like you have to go out and spend a bunch of money. Just find strong partners, and they're there. They're at the show now.
Get to the show. Thank you, Roger. You're right, though, Matthijs, that what's happened is people have been accessing these little cloud systems. And they've got these messy, what we call tech stacks. I'm using a little technology here and a little technology there. And, this marketing team pulled in this software to do this thing. And the manufacturing team wants this software for their checklists. And these messy tech stacks are actually creating more problems for people because they're not integrated. So doing a tech stack audit, making sure you have the right technology in place, making sure you're not buying the cheapest technology you can find, but the right technology for your goals, your strategies. Is it a hassle to implement it? It's not easy to get your tech stack correct. It is very doable. It's just not easy. But once you have the right technology pieces in place, you can automate so many pieces of your business. You can have all your data aggregated in one place where it can actually turn into pretty data pictures. So it's getting the tech stack right that the jewelry industry is still struggling with.
You give us hope. I mean, for even our business where we have a lot of digital assets and trade shows and magazines, subscribers, I can't tell you how many monthly charges I get for subscriptions to this service and that service and this audience database management system and on and on and on. And we've got some resources to try to put that together, but it's still a really big struggle. So if I'm putting my own perspective, I'm struggling with that, and I'm a smaller business, the struggle could be even greater. Anyway, that's just a comment on, and if there's ways to consolidate more of that information, it'd be a really helpful resource, I think, for a lot of people out there.
And like Roger said, we're not trying to give everyone a lot of homework. Pick one thing just pick one thing to start with. Make your own goals and try to chunk this down to what's the most important thing for your business today. And then go from there. Don't try to like jump all the way, across if you haven't learned how to swim yet.
So that's another good point for the model shift that we're seeing as labor is more stressful and technology is required to be competitive, and smaller independent businesses have been able to survive for a long time in this industry without a plan. And planning is not optional anymore. You need a clear strategic plan that articulates who you are, what you stand for, why you matter, who you're targeting, because you're not targeting everybody. And that turns into a sales plan, which turns into a marketing plan, which gives you your cash flow plan. These planning steps are no longer optional for small business. You cannot be competitive without them. But that's what your accountant is, not bookkeeper, your CPA accountant or your fractional CFO. Because these days you can have a CFO part-time and it's somebody that's capable of running a mid-sized enterprise at the CFO level. That you have that person help you put that together. You don't have to figure it out yourself.
And there's a lot of fractional, and that's another shift in, everyone thought I had to hire someone myself. You don't. There are plenty of companies out there, and when we say fractional CFO, it's like part-time. They've got a lot of different clients, and they appear like they're working for you, but they have a bunch of clients. And if you're on the manufacturing side, there are fractional sales vice presidents. There's these companies that you can hire to help you so that you don't have to bring on the employee yourself, but they've got the experience and they know what they're doing. You probably couldn't afford them if you were going to try to hire them out on your own, but you can afford them 10, 20 hours a week. And so letting them get on your team to help you figure out, how do I come up with a strategy? What do I do? A lot of people get scared of that word because they don't know where to start. And so having someone help you, create a project, hire someone short-term just to help you get through, and then decide where you go with that.
Yeah, and you can chunk that plan down and do it one piece at a time, like you just said. The time's going to go by either way. How many pieces of your plan do you want to have in place 2 years from now?
It's interesting. I didn't understand the whole fractional CFO thing, and until obviously the last year or two, I've been meeting more and more people that are doing it. And the fact that it's now come up as an industry and a business, whereas it didn't exist like that a few years back, just shows the shift, especially with hybrid workplaces now. And so much of this can be done remotely. You don't have to have somebody in your own town that you need to hire. You have the whole country at your fingertips. And so you have to realize that that also helps. I mean, that's been a shift in just the way people work, that it opens up opportunities for everybody.
Where do you source somebody like that also has understanding of the nuances of, let's say, an independent jewelry store or a manufacturer?
I know of a specific company who hired someone from the jewelry industry to be on their team. So I'm sure there's others, and if you just research, either it's called fractional or there's another name for it, and I'm trying to remember it right now. But
I know when I wanted a fractional HR senior executive, I just went on LinkedIn and said, I'm looking for a fractional HR, senior executive, and I just got flooded with responses.
And LinkedIn is, I think, an underused tool. There was a point about a year ago I needed to get a lawyer for a very specific thing. And I literally went on LinkedIn and I just typed in the subject that I was looking for. And it was great because then I went to people and I saw who was connected to who, and then I reached out to my network and said, do you know this person? Do you know anything about them? And it was people that, some of them I knew well and some of them I didn't know well, but they were all very forthcoming and telling me, oh yeah, I know this person, go here, go there. It's underused, and I think that there's some good to it in understanding how to use some of these social media platforms. And LinkedIn, I think, is sometimes underused by our industry.
I have an HR advisor now that was senior HR for a Fortune 100 company for 20 years. We are not a Fortune 100 company.
Not yet, Andrea, not yet.
So let's talk about this other model shift then, which is labor, how people work. How do we accommodate the way people want to work in the future? What do we need to do in our own businesses, from technology to management to metrics? That's a huge shift that we need to get in front of.
Yeah, I mean, from our own experience, we've always been a remote-based company, so it's part of just the way we've always operated. But I could, as we're seeing our people in our neighborhood, for example, who are used to commuting to New York City are now not commuting to New York City, or they're commuting a couple days a week. So one of the opportunities there, I think, is for, we talked about earlier on this panel, is that there's more people at home, working from home, being able to utilize local retail and local establishments. So the restaurants in our community have a better lunchtime than they've ever had before. And those kind of shifts seem to be pretty permanent. So there's a real opportunity for local retail to take advantage of a customer base that's now at home rather than constantly in a commuting situation.
And seeing and applying that a step further, if I was a retailer, I'm like, yeah, but I need people in the store because I need them to sell, so what am I going to do? Every statistic I'm reading is the workplace looks for more flexibility. And so even from the retail perspective, if your team is looking for flexibility, so you want them to do clienteling, they don't have to be in the store to do that clienteling. So if you can work through their schedule and give them that flexibility, but allow them to do that from home, so they can be with their families or do whatever they want, come in late. It doesn't mean that hybrid workforces only have to or not have to work in an office setting.
But then you also need the technology, because if your people are going to be clienteling at home, whether they're B2B or B2C, you need the technology that aggregates those email communications, those text communications. You don't want your business communications locked up in somebody's private mobile device or email. So now you need CRM technology. But then the whole team gains the benefit of the shared visibility of those communications, and those technologies actually move the clienteling along in a sales pipeline. So you get more efficient and better at it. So, but I agree, so many things don't have to be done in the workplace.
You know, and so we're laughing because right before this we were having a whole conversation about the metaverse. And so, as much as we don't understand it or know it, in 5-10 years, people are going to have meetings in the metaverse. It's not today, I get that, but we need to know that this is on the horizon and start reading about it, learning about it, figuring out how does that apply to me. And so right now, it may not be something that we're comfortable with, but the 12-year-old that is comfortable with it is going to be your customer looking for an engagement ring in 10 years.
And they might want to do it on Roblox, which continues to thrive for all kinds of weird reasons.
Mm-hmm. But being able to have those meetings, and your best client just moved to Florida. How do I keep in touch with them? Well, yes, I can email them, and we could do a Zoom, and I could show them this. Or maybe in 10 years, I'm going to meet them in my meeting place in the metaverse so that I can have this kind of relationship. Because everyone wants that human touch. Yes, it's not that human touch, but as people are going to get more comfortable with it, we better understand what that means. And look at the big brands. You've got Tiffany and LVMH that are creating NFTs in the metaverse, and our people, yes, I know they crashed, but they're going to come back. It's
And they have events. They have Roblox events. I'm just curious with our live audience, how many of you have put on a VR headset and used it? It's time. It is time.
Should we count how many hands that was?
For our digital audience, not a hand went up. But this is on you too, digital audience. If you haven't started playing with these technologies, you never get past the fear of the new thing or the resistance, or just if you don't have a personal understanding of it, you can't start picturing how you might benefit from it.
Yeah, and you play with them also because it's the cool factor, right? It's magic. We have magic in our world. Technology is magic. And so however it's going to impact our business, we're not always clear on. But at the same time, these things are pretty incredible. And so just for the curiosity, human curiosity side, look at it, put it in context of what you do on a day-to-day basis, and maybe somewhere is the idea of it supporting your customers and your business.
And it's going to evolve. I mean, we were talking earlier, and they asked me, like, well, how is this going to apply to our industry? Specifically, what is this going to do? So, and I had just done a course. So imagine, right now, we all shop online. I don't know if we all do, but some of us do. And the returns are huge. Well, imagine you have your avatar that's got all your dimensions and measurements and everything, and now it's not going to be this heavy Oculus, I don't think, in 5-10 years. They're going to figure out how to make it much easier to wear. But now I just instead of shopping on my computer, I go into the metaverse and I could try a dress on and see exactly how it fits me so I don't have to return it. And while I'm trying that dress on for my daughter's wedding or for that event that I have next week or the 24 karat, whatever it may be, oh, I need a really nice necklace to go with this, because we all know with necklaces it matters how it fits. Is it going to fit in the neckline? Oh, well, that jeweler is a partner, and so now I could take this piece of jewelry and put it on, and click, I want to buy that, I want to buy that. It's still going to come to me, but there are applications. And again, not going to happen today, but if we're not aware of it, we need to just have it in the back of our minds so it's not a shock to us when this happens.
And maybe that jewelry store might be in Arizona, but they have the employee who's interfacing with you could be in California.
Exactly.
So that could solve some of the problems that we face right now with labor shortages.
Exactly. So this model shift isn't, we've been looking at virtual reality since before the pandemic and saying, kind of cool, kind of fun, don't see how it applies to me. But you take technology shift plus labor problems, and you suddenly have a model that solves labor problems with virtual interactions. And there's so much pressure on labor right now that that is a very realistic thing to be looking at.
And in agreement with everything I said, at the same time, I think I just wanted to emphasize the in-store experience again. One of the things that I have trouble with is shopping online. I'm not a great online shopper. It's a list of product. There's very few format changes in that experience, so maybe the metaverse is an answer to that. At the same time, what I think is an element of that human shopping experience is the discovery of things, right? You go into a store and you run into things that you didn't think you needed, a point of purchase or on the shelf next to the thing that you went into the store for. The grocery stores are great for that, right? You needed peanut butter and next to it is jam. So it's all those product placements, really good visual merchandising that allow a store to thrive. Because one of the things that we noticed through the pandemic too is that when you're just selling what people need, it's enough maybe to cover the business operating expenses, but it's all the additional purchases that happen because of circumstance, because of the serendipity of it, that make the store, that make it special, that make it brilliant. And I don't know if technology has an answer for that today. It may in the future. I'm not a futurologist, so I wouldn't pretend to know that, but I think that's a secret element of the store, the in-store shopping experience, is to find this magical space where you're introduced to things that you didn't think you needed. That is a discovery.
And that's where your margin comes from instead of the opaque supply chain.
But
the
how
differentiated experience.
But how do you apply that now to the in-store experience? As an example, I was at the Consumer Electronics Show a few years back, and they had a whole retail area. So there's mirrors that you can have in your store. So what's the hardest thing? Oh, I'm trying this earring on, I'm trying this earring on, how does it look? I want to send it to my husband. Well, there's these digital mirrors that you can take a picture of it this way and it saves it. Now take a picture of it this way, saves it. Shows it side by side, and I can now send that off to or I can bring in my sister or my mother to FaceTime with me on the digital mirror. There's technology out there that can help enhance this store experience that we can bring into the store because they are coming in. So if I see this ring, but I really want to see how it's going to look with a pear shape or a round or in yellow gold or in white gold, oh, I could see it. And then I could put my hands like this so I could see how it looks on me. So there's ways that we're going to bridge that gap, and it's going to be brought into the retailer. And those that have those cool toys, guess what? When I go and I'm speaking with my friend, where'd you get that? Oh my God, you gotta go to Roger's store, because you know what? They've got this fun little gadget there, and you can build your own ring, and then you can put your hand there and see how it looks, and da-da-da-da. People talk about that because it's something different. It's something new on the block. So embracing that, knowing that there's a model shift, is going to be really key.
One of the retailers was actually using a VR device to show the experience of mining at one point. And I thought that was pretty cool. So incorporating technology in the stores is important, but I think the store experience as a model shift needs to be considered way beyond the technology as well. Have stores that don't look the same day in, day out. For our supply sector in the jewelry industry to look at merchandising more the way that Hasbro and Nabisco and the big liquor companies think about supporting merchandising, because they go to market with their retailers with incredible support for moving products, and the jewelry industry isn't using those same models. So really looking outside ourselves to say, what do we put in stores with our retail partners to help an experience evolve?
It's as simple as QR codes. How many retailers out there today are using QR codes in their store or in their case? to show, and why? Well, it depends. What's the purpose of it? But a QR code, when it first came out years ago, everyone's like, oh, this is never going to take off. This isn't going to do anything. Now you can't go to a restaurant without it. It's on our badge. You can't go to a restaurant without having a menu. So when I go to a store, is there a QR code in the showcase talking about the story behind the product that's in there?
And that's the transparency piece. I was at a manufacturer in Bangkok. They have about 500 employees. So sophisticated. Every piece of jewelry, you could see where every component was sourced from, who worked on it, when they worked on it, and that kind of transparency is the differentiator, and it sets you apart completely. And it might seem difficult to grasp, but I think consumers really asking for that. Transparency and authenticity.
Storytelling.
And there's ways to tell that story. It's such easy things to print out a QR code. The technology's there. And going to your suppliers to ask them, how can you help me? This is what I'm doing. Again, this is all about us realizing that we're one industry, and those, I used to call it the walls, that used to exist between retailers and manufacturers where they more butt heads. No, we work together. We're in this together, and make sure you're partnering with manufacturers that are there to help you with that story. You know, from whether it's your jewelry or the supplies that you've got in your place and what your shop is using, those are all stories. People are interested in that. They want to know how their jewelry is made. And if you have a shop, show them. Tell them where you're getting your materials and what you're doing and how you're doing it and the technology that's out there.
And we might need to be using more of that digital storytelling in the store, again, to supplement labor where we're struggling. But also manufacturers and suppliers can be bringing different types of training to their retail partners. So how many times have you wished, I just wish people knew how to use this tool, or I wish they knew, how to sell this piece of jewelry, where in other industries, manufacturers are having learning management systems developed just for themselves to push to their retails, and they have point systems, so all the salespeople, every class they take, they earn points, and you can see because they actually took a little quiz at the end, and these systems are really easy to put together, and you've leveraged your sales team and your training capacity across way more people that are also able to tell the story.
It's very true. It's like everything we're talking about here can seem overwhelming, and
pick a piece, just right, any piece.
One idea, right? That's the idea.
That's the key. And that's the key, is remembering that it's just one idea you have to grab onto.
And to do something unique and get support, in your example, is there are trunk shows in industry, and there's events you can host, women's or ladies' night, or whatever these things retailers are doing, and that creates a kind of brand. It can be a brand supported experience. So there are already tools in place. There could be more developed by everybody, but there's already some ideas out there that could be implemented tomorrow, if you will.
Yep, and just be really learn how to market those things to get people in. There was a garden center, just an independent retail garden center near us that attracted 1,200 women to a ladies' night that they promoted. And it's in rural Wisconsin. We're not talking a Chicago garden center.
And it's funny because we're talking about all these things. I feel like years ago, everything occurred in silos. You had your marketing, you had your sourcing, you had your people out on the show floor. Whereas today, everything we're talking about, if you listen, we're always overlapping. Technology is overlapping with marketing, overlapping with social media, overlapping with sourcing, overlapping with how are we going to get the labor force. We have to realize we're one organization, not silos within an organization.
That is a massive model shift that's affected all industries, what we call throw it over the wall management, where one department throws it over the wall to the other department and they don't have transparency to each other. We can't function that way anymore. It's too expensive.
People are cross-training. And they don't, cross-training doesn't mean just having someone there as backup. It means someone to truly understand what the other person's doing, because then they could speak to that much better. It's not only about, just in case you're out today, I could do your job. It's, I can understand what you're doing, so I can communicate that to who the next person is going to talk to.
And cross-training is great for employee retention. It keeps us fresh.
This came up in another session we did yesterday, so I apologize for the redundancy, but we were talking about it used to be that there was a ladder people felt they had to climb to progress in their career. I had to move into management and then to higher management. We're a bunch of small businesses. The ladder is really short. But what we do have is the opportunity to provide professional development and investment in their training. And I read an author who I cannot remember her name, so I apologize for not crediting her, but she said, stop talking about the ladder, talk about the river. That people want to develop and get better at and get better compensated for being really, really good at what they do.
In jewelry manufacturing, retail even, it interfaces with many technologies, 3D printing, casting, laser technology. It's the apex of technology.
It's
and
cool.
You focus on a very specific niche that turns into something beautiful that you can pass down for many generations. So that's the differentiator, that's the unique aspect, and we have to communicate that to the next generation, because working in this industry is wonderful. It really is.
And do come back this afternoon at 4:15 Eastern Time. We will be talking about MJSA's new apprenticeship program, talking about bringing more labor in. But I did not come up with this, and I'm going to blank on her name too. There's, I just can't do names today. I probably couldn't get my children right. Anyway, she said the jewelry industry is a STEM industry. We are science. We are technology. We are engineering. We're a STEM industry. That's cool to employees, but we have to embrace it if we want to attract people into it.
And attracting people into it, we have to remember that the younger generation, I'm talking like the teenagers out there, invest in the people in the sense that hire someone part-time in school or in college to help you out, and then they may really like it, and keep in touch with them. Because when they graduate and they're looking for a job, there's no reason why you can't bring them on board. I know someone that started at 16 working part-time in a jewelry store, and she's in her mid-20s now, and she's the vice president of marketing for this huge company. Why? Because she grew up with them, and they've seen and they've invested in her. So, you know, I think there's certain, you always think that certain people, certain positions need certain time or age or whatever. It's not like that. It's about finding the best candidate for what you need and looking at their skill set rather than looking at anything else.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, the jewelry industry provides an incredible quality of life for a hell of a lot of people. You know, it starts young, right? I mean, Roger, you came into this business when you were yay high, right? So, I mean, I think that's something that's interesting to tap into, is that, you know, how do we cultivate interest in this space amongst young people? And there's many ways to do that, and, you know.
And I feel it would be remiss not to mention, we are an industry of a lot of family businesses. And as such, we have the issue of not wanting to have a conversation about transition, because we're going to live forever, or the kids have been in it, like Roger, I've been also this. We don't have those conversations because, yeah, you're just going to take the business over one day. And then they're shocked when their kid doesn't want to take the business over, or when they do and they have no plan of what they're going to do. Don't forget to start planning a lot earlier. If you're an owner of a business and you have a child there, and you don't think you're retiring for 10, 20 years, you got to start talking about it now. You need to start talking about that transition and where is the business going and who's going to take it over and what they're going to do and what their responsibilities are, and start working through those problems now, not when you need to.
Well, and really commit to learning, technically learning the work of leadership and management. I'm often invited to go work in companies to help them, this phrase breaks my heart, transition from family to professional management. So I go in as a CEO. Why are we transitioning from family to professional management? Family management should be professional management. Now, the family may want to make themselves redundant to not have to stay in the business forever, and that's a fine transition plan. But committing to the work of learning how to be leaders and technical managers, both, is a really critical part of surviving as businesses in the future.
Absolutely.
So, as both of you who went out and learned how to be technical, professional managers of family businesses understand. Absolutely. Okay, so in our last few minutes, thinking about the shifts that we're talking about, the labor shifts, the technology shifts, the supply chain pressures, all of these things that are pushing model change. What do you picture the jewelry industry looking like, say, 25 years from now?
I think it's going to still rely on a lot of the key fundamentals that don't change. But again, it's how we embrace these new tools of technology to incorporate in our businesses to make us more effective and connect us better with our audiences. I think one of the other things that's imminently going to change is that there's, as they're discussing in the next 10 to 20 years, is a massive transfer of wealth from one generation to the other. So it's going to be interesting to see how that's absorbed, because a lot of that is going to be not immediately used as disposable income. So anyway, it's a nuance, but we're going to have to, that could be a really big boon for the jewelry business. So I think that's, where it's going to be in 20 years, nobody can tell you that. But at the same time, what we can do is keep our eyes and ears open, see what's coming down the line. What are things like the metaverse going to do to allow us to connect better with our customers on the B2B side, B2C side, or wherever that might be.
And the industry, if it keeps adapting, it will stay relevant. So the preference for yellow gold to white gold to, a different alternative metal, that will change, of course. But if the industry changes with it and understands consumer preferences, then it will still be relevant, forever.
And to that point, I agree. Like, who could tell what the trends is going to be? But I do think the in-store experience is always going to be there. I do think people are going to walk into a store to actually buy jewelry. I just think the way they're going to get into the store and the way they're going to shop for it is going to change as the younger generation becomes the consumer and is more comfortable with technology. I think that the stores that embrace that and embrace that entire chain are going to be the ones that are successful, and the ones that are still trying to figure out how to create a website are probably not going to be here.
And I see those shifts on the manufacturing and supply side as well. I see manufacturers and suppliers building different types of strong relationships with their retail partners. I see, we were talking about this a little bit, Roger was saying they're upping their trade show game at Gesswein, but they're treating them differently. It's for relationship building and experience building and cultivating those relationships beyond the trade show. I see trade shows and trade show business is back. Across the country, people are investing in in-person trade shows, but the exhibitors are going to be going to those trade shows, not saying, hey, trade show floor, what did you do to get me foot traffic? They're going to recognize the trade show provides the theater, but you bring the play. And each exhibitor is coming to the trade show having marketed the hell out of their visit to the trade show and bringing a booth that tells a story and creates excitement and really manages the experience differently.
And I'm seeing a shift in the type of employees that the brands and the manufacturers are hiring. And so the ones that have been that are seasoned, that have been in the industry for a long time, if they are not adapting to the new way of doing business, they're getting replaced by a new worker that came from outside the industry, that is embracing technology, embracing data, and embracing relationship selling as opposed to product selling.
Well, and selling, like really remembering, there's a back to basics thing that's part of this model change that I also don't think people are focused on. Marketing is not selling. Marketing is in service of selling. Selling itself is changing. Looking at the way we build sales pipelines and manage target accounts and who are we going after and why are we going after this client and not that client, and the technologies we can use to actually help us focus on the right clients. That's also a model change that the manufacturing and supplier world really needs to embrace, because some of the other ways of marketing just aren't working.
Right. Not everybody needs to be your customer. And so it used to be that we used to throw this wide net around and go into a store and try to open every single store there because, they're all my customer. They're not. And so using the data, using the information, sometimes it's okay to say no. Sometimes it's really okay to say, I'm not
Most
the
of
right
the
person.
time, it's okay to say no.
But you should go buy from Andrea because she is the right person. I may not fit in your place. But it's hard as a manufacturer to do that. So again, making that shift in your mind and saying, I can do much more with my existing 100 clients. than trying to open 100 new ones.
Or I've targeted a Dream 100 clients, and that comes from Chet, what's his name, who wrote that amazing, God, I can't do names again today. This is such a problem. I'll like post notes with all the names later. But there's a guy who taught selling in the 70s and 80s, and he talked about identifying your Dream 100 accounts. That's who you sell to. And when you can't close one, you move it off the list, and you elevate somebody new to it. And when you close one, you add somebody new to it. But sell to the people who are your ideal client profile, not everybody.
And understand what that profile looks like. Because you have the information today, every one of us, if we really want to be honest with ourselves, the 20/80 rule, look at your top customers. If you start really analyzing who they are, what's their not only their demographic, but what's the makeup of their store, what do they look like, we kind of have an idea of what works and what doesn't work.
Technographic and firmographic data, yeah.
And to that point too, on the marketing side, you still use a lot of broadcast media. We're a broadcast media organization, and we reach a large demographic with very consistent messaging, and it's broad messaging. But Andrea works with our team as well, and she's introducing account-based marketing, right? So we can use our broadcasting for a local business. Maybe that's outdoor advertising in the local paper or Instagram or Facebook. But at the same time, some of the account-based marketing side is that I can specifically identify these 100 top customers and send them unique individualized messaging, incentives, stories, invitations, and all those kind of things. And it's the combination of all of those together that's going to make an effective marketing package. Again, it's another service, it's another thing. Don't let that intimidate, but there's tools out there that can be put together and create really effective results.
I feel like all four of us are super enthusiastic and optimistic about the future of the jewelry industry, even talking about all those changes.
Absolutely. You can't be afraid of change. You need to embrace it and get excited about it. Just like we were talking earlier, risk isn't bad. Risk is good. You just have to figure out how to embrace it and understand that it's all tools to get you to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we add value, is to solve complex problems, right? If basic work, we can outsource that to AI at one point, or some robots, but solving complex problems that are not intuitively related to each other, that's where human labor adds value. I think that's where the excitement is. On the media side, we're constantly being disrupted by another platform, or another this, or another approach. We don't have the answers to most of it, but it's the enthusiasm, the excitement of trying to figure that out. What is the meaning of those kind of things? And where can we monetize it or add value to our audiences that way? But that's what keeps us going. That's the exciting part of it.
And that's what keeps our employees going too. That's what helps us keep them.
Because we need to continually bring in new blood into the industry. And I can't wait for you guys to hear about the 4 o'clock talk about the apprenticeship program. I think it's fabulous.
It's exciting.
So it's really exciting. And so there's tools out there. MJSA has tools, other places have tools to help every part of that supply chain in what they're doing.
So maybe the place to, Matthijs just gave me my wrap up, which is, it can seem overwhelming to think about all these changes that we need to make and implement. And you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, nobody has the answers until they start asking the questions. When we start asking the questions, neuroscience tells us our brains go crazy happy. Ask your brain a question before you go to bed and watch what you wake up with in the morning. The brain is wired to be asked questions. So ask them, how is this labor dynamic going to affect my business going forward? How is the combination of any of these elements, supply chain challenges plus labor, likely to lead to different answers for my business? How, why, what? Ask the questions, and I think it becomes fun instead of overwhelming to think you have to have all the answers, and you don't have to do it without making mistakes. Listen to Richard Branson talk, and he will talk for an hour, and he'll talk for 4 or 5 minutes on his big successes, and the rest of the hours on all his failures and how amazing they've been for teaching him what to do next. So don't feel like you have to get it perfect either.
One thing to think about is focus on what you do well, what differentiates you. There's so many different complex challenges and uncertainties, but if you look at what you do well, what makes you unique, and focus on that, I think that'll open up where you can start first.
Really good advice.
Yeah, maybe also tune out some of the hype on occasion. You know, I think in this case, you know, for example, everybody's talking about ChatGPT, and it almost becomes, when you go into the news feed, if you will, it becomes overwhelming. Like, this thing is going to slap us all in the face. But sometimes it's good to have some perspective, take a breath, and go, you know, the core of my business is here. I can focus on that. I can take this bit of information and make good, conscious decisions before, you know, again, the rug is swept out from under us in some particular way. Anyway, so I think in a lot of these things, to the point of e-commerce taking over all of retail, you know, 20 years in, we're 13.5% online retail. So we can absorb these things in a much more digestible format. And I think sometimes we just need to take a big breath, exhale, and say, okay, now what am I going to do next? So a little patience and calmness is helpful.
You guys are great. I could do this all day with you, but I guess these guys need to go shopping. And anyway, I want to thank Matthijs Braakman with SmartWork Media, and Ann Arnold with Big, and Roger Gesswein III with Gesswein for this fabulous conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. And I want to thank MJSA because they let us do such fun things with the education program. Again, we're at MJSA Expo, we're at the Javits and the River Pavilion. If you are anywhere in the region, you really should be shopping here if you make jewelry. Because these are your partners and the most trustworthy partners in the jewelry business. So get to the show. And with that, we'll sign off.
Thanks.
Thank you.